The Pathfinder, challenges to change. Change is good. Tell yourself that as often as is necessary. One day, hopefully, you'll be standing in the future that you somehow knew was on its way into your life. But wouldn't it be great if you could stand there looking back on the past and see how much you've changed and how much difference your life has made to others? In his book Pathfinder, about his experiences as an officer in the British Army Parachute Regiment's Pathfinder platoon, David Blakely speaks about the role of his unit within the British Army. This unit, PF Platoon, specialises in advanced reconnaissance missions, often deep behind enemy lines, where they mark out drop zones and helicopter landing sites for use by the units that will be following them into action. As you can imagine, being an elite unit with an incredibly demanding selection process, there's not many of them. If you'll flow with me here, I think that too often we think that those warriors who help hurting people in our churches and society to change are the same type of thing, an elite force of specialists. But the truth is that while the Army Pathfinders definitely are that and more, in our context, the qualification for helping people to change is that you've changed in some area yourself. Obviously, it helps to increase your skill and knowledge base, but you don't have to wait until you're some kind of expert before extending a helping hand to a needy person. On this point, Captain Blakely interestingly recounts how his unit used a particular saying a lot. Possibly originating with Sir Winston Churchill, it simply says, "Shake change by the hand before change grips you by the throat." This quote sums up the attitude that you need when the prospect of change is part of the equation you're facing. And the fact is that change is always going to be a major part of life because everything changes. So you either make change a friend or one day it's going to treat you like an enemy. Or in other words, everything changes, but not all changes are positive. If you're passive about change, you might find change overtaking you in ways that you really don't want. So it's best to be intentional about changing. Unfortunately, change isn't the easiest thing in the world to actually do. And one of the main reasons why people don't enjoy it is because it's uncomfortable. There's another great book by Bruce Wilkinson called The Dream Giver, which begins like this. Not long ago, and not far away, a nobody called Ordinary lived in the land of familiar. The book is about how to identify and overcome obstacles that keep millions from living the life they were created for. And it takes this person called Ordinary on a journey of change. On this journey, Ordinary had lots of decisions to make as he made his way closer to his big dream. He made hard choices. He made difficult changes. And he even made big sacrifices. He saw how pursuing his dream could cause him a lot of discomfort and that he would have to do unusual things in unusual places. And he realized that to do what he most loved, he'd have to do what he most dreaded. Then he saw it clearly. He could either keep his comfort and stay a nobody, or he could keep his dream and become a somebody. But to do that, he had to leave the land of familiar. So Ordinary left the comfort zone and went through the wasteland following a being called Faith, and found just enough to drink and ate fruit that wasn't sweet and wasn't sour, but was satisfying. I think this pretty much sums up most of us, if we're really honest. We want to be somebody and do something important or memorable, but to actually see something like that come to pass, we have to be prepared to change. At first, there's usually some resistance which needs to be overcome, because if we're honest, at some level of our being, we fear it and what it brings with us. This resistance to the process of change is mainly because of two things. A sense of loss. People emotionally feel a sense of loss in the process of change. Have you ever felt like you were losing it or had lost something? How did you react? Didn't you try to hold on to whatever you were losing? I call this the pit bull's bone principle. When I was 17, I got a pit bull puppy. They were rare in the UK in those days, and I had the most fun raising him. His name was Danny Boy, and he became my constant companion. Contrary to popular opinion, this breed of dog is the most loyal and intelligent dog you can hope to have. And although a bit boisterous to be sure, when exercised well, they're extremely chilled out, lovable, and fun to have. I do agree that not everyone should have one, but I hope you're getting the picture that they're not all devil dogs, as some would have it. Anyway, Danny never bit me, except playfully by accident when I would wrestle him, and even then he'd thankfully hold back his full bite. He was extremely well trained and obedient because I was intentional about doing that. And one thing he loved more than anything is when I would get him a huge, juicy beef bone as a reward for something good that he'd done, and I'd get that from the local butcher. This would be sawed in two and would be full of delicious, to a dog at least, bone marrow. Danny would lay contentedly chewing on that bone for days. There would come a time when it would be done, but he'd bury it and dig it back up and go at it again. Whenever it was time to give it up, he found it the most difficult thing to do. He would not give that stinking thing up willingly. He'd growl menacingly and even show his teeth in a menacing way. He couldn't help it. And neither can we when this happens to us. It's just a natural and sometimes desperate emotion to hold on to what we know. Like the bone scenario, what was once a good thing might not be good anymore. And I've seen people get stuck in a place that stopped being good a long time ago. Even destructive things like bad relationships or addictions or negative habits can seem better than an unknown alternative. Whether we realize it or not, we can't face the seeming loss involved. There's a loss of power and control at first. Then it seems as if there's a loss of familiarity or unconscious tradition or ritual. This causes a loss of comfort, eventually a loss of stability, and the feeling of loss is an empty feeling in the pit of the stomach. It's a punch to the heart. It's like something grips you by the throat to choke you. And then the panic starts to kick in. It doesn't even matter if people know that the change is needed because they feel they may be losing something in the change, and so it causes them to resist the change. And it's because these emotions are based on some elements of truth that it's so hard, because it means that things are going to be different in some way. And that leads to the other biggie where change is concerned, a sense of fear. If we're honest, most of us in some way fear the unknown. But fear is a terrible enemy to give into because it has no mercy. Even if you surrender to it, it will still keep strangling you until there is no life left in you. And it's this aspect of change that causes far too many people to just settle for staying the same. Because when things change, priorities shift, schedules are altered, commitments are looked at. These adjustments then cause anxiety because they require people to do things differently. And nothing is so secure as the familiar. It's comforting, probably not challenging, which is why most of us avoid change at all costs. But by avoiding change, we create even bigger problems, such as lost opportunities, broken relationships, or sometimes even a completely wasted life. I've seen this too many times when someone has incredible potential, but resists changing something or somewhere and sadly ends up as a could have been, living in the land of regret. So what can we do to help someone in this situation? Let's go back to my pit bull. The first advantage I had was that I had a relationship with Danny Boy. He trusted me. This aspect of relationship can never be highlighted enough for someone in a leadership capacity. The old saying, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, is a true one. And this doesn't have to be a huge undertaking, just paying them some attention, Listening and giving some time to them is really all it takes, as long as it's sincere. But the next part was the clincher. I didn't just ask him to give up his old bone, I gave him an alternative. I showed him the new bone, all fresh and juicy. After a few growls and a few sniffs, the loss of the old was offset by the potential of the new. And then I'd stroke him and show him love and tell him, good boy, well done. Practically, we can do this in two ways. Number one, my story, your story. Sharing your own testimony of change. I'm a firm believer that footprints are better than signposts when leading some kind of change. If you're offering an alternative to something that needs to go, it's important to show something real. And quite often, your own experiences can paint a workable picture for someone else. One of the best ways of doing this is by telling your story. How change happened in your life. This is really important because of how the human brain works. When you tell your story, it often helps to begin with the problem or challenge you faced, which introduces a certain tension to the story. And because of this tension, your body produces the hormone cortisol. This releases adrenaline when the tension is experienced and biologically makes people tune in to what you're saying. Add to this some personal details, and this causes a sense of empathy. And so then the bonding chemical, oxytocin, is released. Oxytocin and cortisol are powerful together. And as you tell your story, this brings the moment called by people who study this stuff, especially filmmakers and advertisers, transportation. Your brain then begins to think that it is actually happening right now, and it feels like you've become part of the story yourself. This is why we cry or laugh or whatever as we watch a good film, and it's a form of what's known as neural coupling. Suddenly, you can see the alternative being presented as a real option, and you find yourself actively involved in the story. But the key to a strong story is something called resolution. Resolution is the point where you come to a decision that something needs to be done. And then there's a determination to actually do something about it. With resolution, dopamine is released. This is the feel-good chemical, and is designed to reward us when we've overcome something difficult. So when you show how a change you were facing was overcome, it's a bit like when my old dog Danny Boy realised that there was something better than his old dirty, stinking wreck of a bone that was available to him. The loss is still the same, but now it becomes more of an investment and not just a sacrifice. Because you can see that whatever you give up in order to change is making room for something better. That's the power of a story. Personal stories demonstrate relevance by making truth more accessible, and that's why they have such an amazing impact. Just don't forget that the other person is not looking for you to be some kind of hero to them. People undergoing change are not looking for the hero of your story. They're looking for a guide, a pathfinder, someone who's already been there, to help them become the hero of their own story. I believe the desired outcome to an engaging story is that the hero is going to be different by the end of it. There's another thing that's needed, which is just as important as your personal story, and it's your ongoing personal presence. Number 2, be there. Don't disengage when they engage. The second practical thing you can do is to journey with them, at least until they're safely on their way. I've found that the best leaders are those who are continually embracing change in some form or another. And because they're in constant motion, making progress in the right direction in their own lives, it's easier for them to journey with someone else who's also beginning to engage in that process. Your presence becomes important because of the other main enemy of change, fear, which tries to come creeping back into the process of change, saying things like, you're not good enough, or you're not going to make it. And so this is where your continuing and truly engaged love for the person that you're helping is crucial. I find that John the Apostle understood this concept better than almost anyone else I've ever read. When speaking to a group of early followers of Christ, he talks to them about love and how in its pure form, It's conditional. Love is unconditional, not conditional. And not just a response to something good, but an attitude of life which reflects the nature of a creator God and how love is the antidote to fear. In 1 John 4:18 it says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love." This perfect love, which in context means mature or complete, leaves no room for fear to control a person's life. And your ongoing, unconditional relationship with the one you're helping to develop does that as you journey with them, reminding them that the changes they're going through are not a punishment, but an investment in a better future. There will come times when they want to give up on the whole process, declaring, "It's too hard." Then your role is to remind them that being unhappy and unfulfilled is hard, and changing is hard, and then help them choose the type of hard they want to live. A positive hard or a negative hard. Your role at that point is to help them stay on track until they enter the phase where changing into something or someone new becomes a positive habit. This can take 30 days or more to become set in their experience, so be prepared for a journey of that length. But then all of a sudden, just like a child learning to ride a bike, they won't need you to hold them up anymore as they wobble off under their own steam. Their journey then becomes about continued practice, because although practice doesn't make perfect, it does make what you're doing more permanent. You then move from being someone who directly shows over the path forward and helps them find stability and security on the path to making sure they stick to the path. The relationship progresses from direct mentorship to a more distanced accountability. You've been through those phases yourself, and you already know the journey leads somewhere good. And by using your experience in this manner, you open up the way for others to benefit. In this way, you become a leader because you have people following you, not just a lone scout who's just reached somewhere before anyone else. So be a pathfinder, because pathfinders lead the way. Make your mark, and then leave some tracks for others to benefit from. Have change as your friend, and then introduce that friendly change to someone else, because change is good.